Hi guys, welcome back. So in this video, what we're going to be covering is what is a portrait? That is going to be our guiding question for this ed puzzle. So what is a portrait? A lot of you guys took your guesses in our class Mentimeter and tried to take a stab at what a portrait actually is. In this video, we're going to break it down into how are portraits made, what materials can you use to make portraits, and what categories portraits can fall into. So let's start with what is a portrait? A portrait refers to a painting, drawing, photo, or any other type of art that the artist creates of someone else. It can pretty much be any material. It's not limited as long as it is an image or piece of artwork of someone else. So we see Billie Eilish, we see Iron Man, Barack Obama, Danny DeVito, a personal favorite from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And so that's what a portrait is. It's just a picture or image of someone else. So how are they made? Portraits can be made from many different types of materials, including paint, pencil, collage, clay, or any sculptural or 3D material like clay. And they can even be created digitally or with a camera. And many of you guys are already making portraits digitally in Procreate and in Photoshop. So we're going to take a look at a couple of different portrait artists, and we're going to start to break them down into different categories. So many artists like Kehinde Wiley use paint to create their portraits, and that's probably where your head might go to when you think portrait or artwork is paint. So his portraits are very, very special because you might recognize his earlier portrait of Barack Obama that he made for the previous president. His artwork is special because he is best known for large-scale work of Black men, women, and children in extremely regal or royal poses with elaborate backgrounds. Wiley started creating these works of art because in most historic portraits in the Western art tradition, we only see white male aristocrats or men in positions of power as being the ones as the subjects of the paintings. If there are people of color, they're either shown in side roles or as side characters, often in servant roles. So what Wiley did as a queer African American man is that he wanted to challenge this tradition of only centering white men in paintings, in traditional paintings, and he's chosen to center and celebrate Black and brown beauty and strength in his large-scale portraits. And we're going to take a look at some of the portraits that he's made and some of the older Western art tradition portraits side by side, and maybe you guys can spot the similarities. So pause right here. On the right, we have a portrait of Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of France. And on the left, we have Officer of Hussars in 2007 by Kehinde Wiley. What do you notice? What are the similarities? Take a pause and type below. Other artists like David Lazar use a camera to create their portraits. Lazar travels all over the globe to visit, learn about, and photograph different groups of people and their cultures. So if you ever look up his work online, it's a lot of really beautiful, very colorful, close-up imagery of people from all around the world. And so a camera is the medium that he uses for his portraits. Some artists like Jane Perkins use found materials to craft their portraits. What objects can you spy in these portraits? And some artists like Jim Kempton use clay to make crazy realistic portraits of celebrities. Fun fact, this is actually the process for creating the figures in Madame Tussauds in London. So those wax figures you guys might see online, this is the starting process for how those are actually made. So this is by, I'm sure many of you guys recognize him. This is of Harry Styles. And so this artist, Jim Kempton, makes his artwork or his portraits out of clay. And notice he's using really, really tiny tools to create very, very specific details to try to match Harry Styles' face. So checkpoint 1, what materials are portraits made from? Answer below. Portraits can be made from many different art mediums, including but not limited to paint, photography, clay, and even found materials like buttons. So there's really no specific answer as to what materials they can be made from. It's pretty much anything, as long as it's an image or a representation of someone else. Okay, so now we know what portraits can be made with, but how do you actually go about making them? What's that process like? So portraits, including self-portraits, which we'll get to after this ed puzzle, fall into two categories, traditional and non-traditional. And we're going to talk about what each of these categories mean and a couple of artists that fit into one or the other. So traditional portraiture. This is probably what you guys think of when you do think of portraiture, because they're typically drawn, painted, or created in a more realistically looking work of artwork. And they're trying to copy what the photo exactly looks like. That's the whole purpose. They want it to look exactly like the photo. So in order to create traditional or realistic portraiture, artists will often use techniques like grid enlarging to copy their subjects more precisely. So if you notice on the bottom right, you'll see there's an image of a woman and it's been gridded out. And what that artist is doing is they're actually creating almost like a paint by numbers, where they're putting the grids on the larger piece of paper, and instead of trying to copy the whole image as a whole, they're just going box by box. And that they're doing that so that they can make the image look as close to the photo as possible. But we're going to take a look at what non-traditional artwork looks like in just a minute. Artists like Kehinde Wiley are perfect examples of traditional portraits because they're painted to closely resemble the live model and or photograph. And if you're looking at this photo here on the right, you can even see Kehinde Wiley painting from a photograph. That's the whole point. They want it to match perfectly. They want it to look realistic. So that's traditional. Anytime you hear traditional, think realistic. Non-traditional portraiture are more stylized and do not have to stick to the rules of traditional portraiture. Non-traditional portraits are expressive, unique, and different. They're not trying to be photographs. So you might look at this and say, that doesn't look like a photo, or that doesn't look very realistic. And that's the point. The whole point of a non-traditional portrait is that they want it to be a little bit more expressive. So they're not super worried with making sure all the shadows are perfect, or that the facial features are lined up or placed exactly in the right spot. So all of these examples that you're seeing on this screen, these are all examples of non-traditional portraiture, right? And a mural artist like Carlos Delgado are great examples of non-traditional portrait artists. Pause below. Describe why you think Delgado is an example of a non-traditional portrait artist instead of a traditional one. And take a look at his murals and his sketchbook. Checkpoint 2. What are the two different types of portraits? Answer below. For this upcoming unit, each of you will be responsible for creating a portrait of yourself. These types of portraits are called self-portraits. We will be going over what a self-portrait includes in our next lesson. Next class, you will be expected to come prepared with a pencil, an eraser, a ruler, which were provided in the take-home bags at the start of the year, and a plain white piece of 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, or a regular piece of printer size paper. That's just pretty much what an 8.5 by 11 size sheet of paper is. Points will be deducted for those who come unprepared to our next class, not having these materials. Please respond below.